I'm going to see if this clicker is working here. Where am I pointing? There we go. All right. So we're going to see how this goes today. I'm going to share some information and some stories about my son, Ian Thomas McNeill. It's personal, but, you know, we talk about sharing, and you guys got to get to know each other, right? I'll get over this part. This is like the emotional part right now. But this is our son. This is Ian. That's him in kindergarten, obviously, as he was graduating. And that's him holding his sister, Ever June, after she was born, 3 days. And that's him in his kilt. Ian Thomas is a Celtic name. McNeill is a little bit Scottish-Irish, if you know. And Ian was not the easiest child to raise. And so as we talk about today, about students with behaviors, I thought it was important to kind of share a parent's perspective. I've worked with many, many of you throughout the years, and some of you know the story of Ian, and some of you don't. So I think it's important to share that. And this is really difficult for me, as I told you, because I don't have a script. So this is going to be one of those things where we're just going to flow and see how it goes. So, Ian and Ever are exactly 7 years, 7 days, 7 hours apart. And one of the reasons for the 7 years is because Ian did not sleep through the night until he was 6.5 years old. You guys figure out the math. Ian suffered from night terrors, crying, temper tantrums, and uncontrollable behaviors. And those behaviors were shown in the classroom as well, with his teachers. And he had fantastic teachers, very patient, loving teachers. And as Ian progressed from kindergarten to first grade, these behaviors were getting more and more noticeable, both in the school setting and at home. And his father and I, him in healthcare, me in education, you would think, well, gosh, you guys know how to figure this out. Not so much. Because sometimes when you're really, really close to the issue, you can't see it. Ian had a very close relationship with one of his principals, who's retired now. And before Ian, when he was in kindergarten, he was assessed. And Ian is an exceptionally bright child. He was tested and went into the far superior range, which sometimes is very problematic. But he is a very bright kid. And so before we decided to go down one route, we took another path. And so Ian went to another elementary school because of that principal. And that principal spent a great deal of time just talking with him. And so did the clinic aide. Ian was best friends with the clinic aide. He would visit her very, very frequently, go in there and just kind of chat up. And so when Ian started to get into upper elementary school and middle school, the behaviors started to go inwards, not so much outwards. And that's really scary. His teachers were concerned. And his father and I, obviously, were going through some of our own issues. So, as parents, Sometimes you don't really see some of the behaviors that are happening with your kids because you're dealing with your own issues. And as time goes on, you feel, why didn't I see this? I'm a principal, for goodness sakes. Why didn't I see these behaviors? And a lot of these things didn't come out until a little bit later. But Ian suffered from depression. Significant depression. And the reason why that's concerning is because on both sides of Ian's family, we've had 5 suicides. I won't share with you his father's, but for me it was my grandmother who committed suicide in her car after being married for 60 years. She decided to turn on the car with the garage closed. My cousin John, who I idolized, was a physicist and shot himself when he was diagnosed with AIDS. So you could understand when you start to see these behaviors in your son, concerns. And his teachers were right on. And you need to address this. His counselor started to talk about books that Ian was checking out. And once in a while, the books really wouldn't matter. But these books became more and more frequent, and the information in the books. And Ian had a very close relationship with his counselor. And as Ian went through middle school, and some of these things come out later, and by the way, when I told Ian I was going to talk about his story, he said, I want you to share it, Mom. I have nothing to hide. I think the more that people know about this, the better off our world's going to be. And I'm very proud of my son. He suffered from bullying, humiliation in middle school. And it wasn't that the school didn't do anything about it. It was after school. But a lot of the kids that he dealt with went to the same school. And because of that, Ian did not want to matriculate into the high school in which he was zoned for. And Ian has a little bit of a problem with motivation. He's kind of a procrastinator. Does not get that side from me. But Ian, on his very own, decided he was going to apply to another school. His father and I didn't even know that he was applying. He wrote the essay. He showed up to the interview because he got somebody to drive him. And lo and behold, he gets accepted into a signature academy. Because he didn't want to go to the school with those kids that were bothering him and bullying him. And now, today, Ian has forgiven them. Ian talks to them. When he went to this new school, he got into a crowd of kids, and unfortunately the darkness came again. And if you don't understand depression, it's really hard to understand how somebody can get to a very, very dark place. And that's how I can describe it. To get to that place and not understand how you can wake up in the morning, or you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to eat. And Ian was starting to go back down that path. I would have to call his principal. He's not getting up. I can't get him to school. And he had a close relationship with his counselor at this school. And the counselor and I would talk. And when you're concerned about your child, you're going to do pretty much anything to save your child. The counselor did not violate any confidentiality, but I was concerned, as his father was, with where Ian was going. And one day I get a call from the principal and said, "Kristen, you need to get down here. Something's happened." So I went to the school. His dad came. School police were there. And they had found a notebook in the library. And in this notebook were some very disturbing letters addressed to different people. Angry letters, pictures. And the school was nervous, and they had every right to be. They didn't know whose notebook it was. Ian wasn't talking. His friends weren't talking. And Ian went down to Jan Evans in handcuffs. And I will tell you, our school police are the best there is. But to see your son in this type of situation is hard. And the police did their job. So Ian went to Jan Evans. And when a child is brought to Jan Evans, you can't see him. And so that night, it was the hardest night of my life. Because you can't talk to your boys. And there's a reason why. They're evaluating, they're checking. When the psychiatrist called me that night and said, "We're really scared about your son and where he's going. And he's going to stay the night." And he's going to stay in isolation with a suicide jacket on. That's not something you ever want to hear. But they were doing it for his protection. My dad flew up to be with us. Ian has a very close relationship with his grandfather. Probably because his grandfather lays down the law. And so the next day, Ian had his hearing. And those of you that have been to a hearing, the child walks in, sits down, the judge sits. You have the prosecutor. And I won't get into all the legalities and issues. I'll just say that sitting there with my son and my dad, or my husband, ex-husband, and to hear some of the information that was coming out, you're kind of at this moment in your life where you start to think, where did you go wrong? What happened? And you see those pictures of when your son was in the kilt, and they're flashing through your head, and which point did you what happened? And Ian, sitting there in the front in an orange jumpsuit, turned around, and he looked right at his dad and me. And he said, "I'm sorry." And he had nothing to be sorry for. So after Jan Evans, Ian had therapy. He was diagnosed with depression, and he was placed on medication. And I'm not going to get into the whole medication issue. You can either believe in it or not believe in it. I personally think that the dosage of the medication is just as important as the type of medication. But in this instance, the medication helped my son. And Ian started to see light. He made new friendships, very important relationships. People that understood where Ian was coming from. He made some very close connections with his teachers. And the school went out of their way to support Ian. He was out of school for a semester because of what had happened. He went on A+. He's not the best online student, by the way. And his dad and I went to counseling. We did family counseling. And his sister went to counseling with all of us. And sometimes just sitting there talking, you learn things. And when Ian was in middle school, we had no idea some of the things that he was going through. And he's able to talk about that very freely today. This is Ian's senior picture. It took me everything to get him to wear a suit to his picture. And thanks to Brian Pruitt, who's sitting there in the back. Brian took this picture. This is Ian's graduation. And there were some days where I didn't think that we would see this day. And you can see pretty much I was strangling him when I was hugging him as well. And today, I am very happy to say that Ian is a student here at TMCC. He's taken his time, but he is a student. He's going slow. But yesterday he texted me and he got 2 A's in his classes, so I was super thrilled. Ian has a heart of gold. He has a black belt in Taekwondo. He teaches boxing to younger kids. And he loves his sister. And he protects his sister. Ian has an affinity for the underdog. And Ian is going to do great things in his life. Let's see. Can you guys change one more slide? There you go. This is just about 2 weeks ago. These are the grandkids. There's 7 of them. Ian is the oldest, Ever is the youngest. We have Sydney, Haley, Timmy. There's Ian. Jakey, who's actually serving in the Marines right now, but he had some time off. And Ever. And that smile that you see on Ian's face is extremely important. Because he knows that he's loved, he knows that he's cared for. But most importantly, he knows that he has a community that cares for him. And he has different avenues to go to when he needs to talk. Depression doesn't end. There's not an end date for suffering with depression. He suffers from depression. He doesn't take his medication. There are good days, and there are really bad days. But Ian has to learn coping skills for that. Ian has to learn how to get along with others. Ian has to learn how to do that if he wants to be employed. And it's because of his teachers and his principal and his counselors and his family that he's the person who he is today. Some of it's genetics. But I wanted to share this story with you as a parent, not as your deputy superintendent, because I think it's important to know where we all come from. And there's a little piece of me that I have just given to you. And I trust all of you. And for my son to be able to share this story with you, he trusts you as well. So as you go through today, just kind of keep a little bit of this in the back of your heads. And I'm very, very proud that I was able to share this with you. Because you all do this work every day, and you take it home with you. And I just want to tell you, spend time with your family, love your family, and love what you do, because you do make a difference every day. So thank you.